Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think today, inshallah, I think the topic was a general advice. So what I've decided to do is instead maybe extract some benefits from Surah Al Fatiha, and then maybe after that we can give some general advice, inshallah. And maybe I can take some of your opinions or suggestions, inshallah. So to begin, inshallah, إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Okay, Allah mentions in the Quran, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Do they not, if only they would ponder on the Quran. If only they would ponder on the Quran. And then Allah also mentions about the believers, يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ, that they recite His book with a correct recitation. And then some scholars mention that this tilawa actually means that they follow His book correctly. So here, the first advice is that as Muslims, we tend to get into the habit of reciting the Quran and just reciting without really learning the correct methodology or the correct rulings of recitation. And this is a big sort of problem that I see with a lot of the Muslims in the community, that they do not have this concern of correct recitation and making sure that the rulings of tajweed are applied in their recitation. And likewise, the Quran itself should be pondered on, and this necessitates the individual to perhaps read and understand the meaning of the ayats, rather than just recite it quickly, as perhaps many of us were doing. We were reciting the Quran in Ramadan, and then we were trying to finish the Quran as quickly as possible. But if we look at the hal of the Sahaba, that the Sahaba, as Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu mentions, that they would recite Ashr ayat, and they would not recite or memorize after those 10 until they've understood those 10 ayat and until they have acted upon the ayat. And this is the meaning of what Allah is mentioning in the ayah. If they would only ponder on the Quran, that as Muslims we should recite it, then we should stop and we should think, try to understand what we are reciting. If some of us don't know the Arabic, perhaps we could maybe read the translation, know what is in the book, rather than just reciting it. Know what's actually in the book. What is Allah, what is He addressing us with? What does He want from us? And perhaps this would rectify a lot of the affairs and tribulations that we are experiencing today in the world, in the modern world that we're living in. So moving on to Surah Al Fatiha, as we know, the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned many fada'il and many virtues of this surah. And just to mention a few of them, that he said, لا صلاة إلا بفاتحة الكتاب, that there is no salah except for Surah Al Fatiha. Unless you recite it in your salah, then your salah will not be accepted. So Surah Al Fatiha is known as Al Fatiha because it is the opening chapter. It is the surah that begins the Quran. And likewise, it is also known as Ummul Kitab. It is known as Ummul Kitab because all of the meanings, the mother of the book, all of the meanings of the Quran go back to the surah. And this is why I really would like to pay some attention to this surah, because most of us have memorized it. So rather than me perhaps reciting a surah to you which perhaps you are not familiar with, I chose this surah because we are all familiar with the surah. It's something that it's a surah which we all recite more than 5 times a day. And perhaps a lot of us are familiar even with the general translation. It's a surah which contains all of the meaning of the Quran. And after we have quickly or briefly extracted some of these benefits, you will see exactly why. In this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes His tawheed, His oneness. So from this surah, we extract the benefits of aqeedah, the issues of aqeedah. Likewise, we can extract a methodology for every single Muslim to follow on a day-to-day basis, whether you're at home, whether you're at work, wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing. You can always go back to Surah Al Fatiha to establish this methodology, not just generally, but also in how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also an encouragement to be amongst the righteous and to do righteous deeds, and also to avoid Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's anger. Allah begins the surah with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the bestower of mercy, or the giver of mercy. So here, there's a manhaj that we learn just from Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, that Allah He begins the surahs with, or the surah with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, with His name. So here is a methodology for us Muslims, that before we do an action, we should seek barakah and blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that way, when we do the action, we'll be blessed in it. And this is why you find that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before he did an action, he made a dua, or he mentioned Allah's name. Before he traveled, he said the dua for traveling. Before he did the action of traveling, he did the dua, he said the dua. Before he ate, Bismillah. Before he entered the bathroom, he said the dua. When he exited the bathroom, he made his dua. Before he slept, he mentioned Allah's name. When he woke up, he mentioned Allah's name. So before he did his actions, you see the Prophet ﷺ would seek the barakah, the blessings, by mentioning Allah's names, because he realizes that the only way to become successful in that action, or the only way to protect yourself from any harm, the only way to bring about the good of that action, is to believe that Allah is in control of all affairs. When you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one who controls everything, nothing happens except by the will of Allah Azza wa Jal. When we understand this, we seek the barakah from Allah, because we know and we believe that it's only by Allah's will we'll be able to fulfill that action. So we make this tabarruk and the seeking of blessing. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is for Allah, the Lord of the worlds. So here, Alhamdulillahi, Alhamdu, you're praising Allah because of your love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you've acknowledged His lordship. You've acknowledged that He is the King. You've acknowledged that He is the Creator. You've acknowledged that He has brought about all of the blessings. So you praising Him out of your love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of your love for Allah Azza wa Jal. And this is one of the ways and one of the principles of actually worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you have to establish the mahabbah. There has to be the mahabbah, that has to be mawjood and present in the heart. The love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he mentions Rabbil Alameen, that He is the Lord of all of the worlds. The world of the jinn, the world of the angels, the world of the insects, the world of the sea, the world of the humans. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Lord and the creator of absolutely everything. So you have the creator and you have the creation. And Allah here establishes His oneness in rububiyyah. His oneness in rububiyyah. That Allah did not say arbab. He didn't say alhamdulillah, lords of the world. He said Lord. So here He establishes Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. So He is the oneness of His Lordship. That He is one Lord. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. The most merciful. Meaning that He is merciful to all of the creation. He's merciful to the Muslims as well as the non-Muslims. He's merciful to all of the insects, to all of the animals, to all of the angels and the jinn. That nothing passes His mercy. That His mercy encompasses the heavens and the earth. Ar-Rahim, the bestower of mercy, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a specific mercy for the believers Yawm al-Qiyamah. So Yawm al-Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a specific and special mercy for the believers, which is His forgiveness and entering them into Jannah. So this is the meaning of Ar-Rahim, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives the believers' sins. And He does not forgive those who disbelieve in Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, Allah establishes the fact that He has names and attributes. So we cannot say Allah does not have names and attributes after Allah here has established that He has names and attributes. And in the hadith, Lillahi, Inna lillahi tis'atan wa tis'ina isma, man ahsaha dakhala al-jannah. That Allah has 99 names. And whoever 100 except mi'atan illa wahida, 100 except one, meaning 99. Whoever understands and applies and memorizes the meanings of these names, he will enter paradise. So whoever knows these names, they understand the meanings of His names, and they try to apply this in their lives, then they will be protected and they will enter paradise bi'idhnillah al-kareem. So when we look at Ar-Rahman, the most merciful, Allah has the sifa of Rahmah, the characteristic of Rahmah. Therefore, we should apply, even though the mercy of Allah is not the same as the mercy of the creation, but we should apply mercy to the rest of the creation. We should be merciful. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. Here, He is establishing the fact that He is the master, the owner and the master of the day of judgment. So here, in the first ayah, Allah says, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, which is an encouragement or reminder that the believer, when he worships, he has to worship Allah with love. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, this encourages the believer when he is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he remembers that Allah is merciful. That by doing your action, you should have hope in the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is another pillar of worship, as Ibn al-Qayyim mentions and the ulama mention, that there are pillars of worship. The believer is like a bird. The head is the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the wings are, the head is the love of Allah azza wa jal, and the wings are hope and fear in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we worship Allah with love, hope and fear. So when we say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, this is an establishment that we should worship Allah with hope. Hoping for Allah's mercy, hoping for His paradise, and hoping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us for our actions. Maliki Yawmiddin, an encouragement that we will return back to Allah azza wa jal. So we should worship Allah with an aspect and element of fear. So we balance the hope with the fear, that we should fear that perhaps we have not established the worship correctly, or perhaps we have done something incorrect that will cause Allah's anger, and perhaps this will cause us to be punished Yawm al-Qiyamah. So when we worship Allah, we should worship Him with this love, worship Him with this hope, and worship Him with the fear. So we should not be like the Murji'ah who have this extremism with regards to hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we should not be like the Khawarij who have this extremism with regards to fear and the punishment of Allah. We should acknowledge the fact that yes, Allah is merciful. He is merciful, but at the same time, He is Shadidul Iqab. He is severe in punishment. But His mercy has overcome and overwhelmed His anger and His punishment. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. So here, after Allah Azza wa Jal has established His Lordship, and the ulama mentioned that the Lordship is a proof for His worship. Why do we worship Allah? You alone we worship, and you alone we seek aid. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ. You alone we worship, and you alone we seek aid. Allah here is mentioned the fact that we should worship Him alone after He's established the fact that He is one Lord. Meaning that we are worshipping Him because He is Rabbul Alameen. We are worshipping Allah alone because He is the Lord of the heavens and the earth. He is the Lord of all of the creation. And we only worship Him because He is the single Lord, alone without any partners. And that when we worship Him out of praise and love, and we worship Him out of fear and hope. And this is the methodology how all of us should worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our salah, when we do our hajj, when we fast. We worship Him with this love, alhamdulillah, with this mahabba, with this praise of Allah, with this magnification and this ta'zeem in our hearts. All of us as a Muslim, we should have this when we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This khushu' when we worship Allah azza wa jal. And likewise, we should hope that Allah will reward us, but at the same time we should fear perhaps we are deficient. So this methodology will cause us to be balanced, inshaAllah. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. So the rest of the surah is a dua, where the slave, he asks Allah, guide us to the straight path. The straight path. So a lot of us, we always sort of make our own interpretation of what the straight path is. Some of us think the straight path is just to blind follow somebody. Just to blind follow someone. And some people think the straight path is to be with a group and just to be concerned with a group of people. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in another ayah, He explains this, that it is the path of the siddiqeen, the truthful ones, the shuhada, and the ones who have been martyred, and the salihin, and the righteous. And those who are righteous, and the most righteous from this ummah, are the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. خير الناس خير القرن أمتي ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. That the best of people are those who are from my generation, meaning the companions, then those who follow them, then those who follow them. So the best, the righteous of this ummah are the companions, the Sahaba of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So being upon their methodology, being upon their way of understanding the deen, being upon how they believed in Allah Azza wa Jal, not blind following people in this time, but going back to the text, to the Quran and the Sunnah, going back to the understanding of the companions and their students, this is how we are rightly guided. We ask Allah, guide us to the straight path. And the Prophet ﷺ has explained to us what the straight path is. He said the ummah was split into 73 sects. All of them will go to the hellfire except one. Then he explained, مثل ما أنا عليه اليوم أصحابي. He said, that which I am upon are my companions. So the haqq and the truth will only be clear to you as a Muslim if you go back to which? Go back to what? The Quran But how can you go back to the Quran if you don't ponder on the Quran, if you don't understand the Quran, if you don't read the Quran? If you don't have somebody to guide you to the Quran. So it is important to have a person of knowledge to guide you, but at the same time, it's also important to ponder and act upon it yourselves. Go back to the Quran. Go back to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and then you understand the text, how the companions understood it. This is how you can tell who is on the Sirat al-Mustaqim and who is not. Sirat al-Ladina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdalin. The path of those whom you bestowed your blessings upon. And as we've mentioned, it is those who are the righteous, those who have been martyred, and those who are the truthful ones. And as we mentioned, that the best of the martyrs of this ummah and the best of the righteous of this ummah are the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, as explained by the Prophet himself ﷺ. So there is no other way, there is no other interpretation for this person to say we follow this path or follow that path. In Surah Al Fatiha, Allah has established a methodology how to worship Him with love, fear and hope, but also a general methodology how to worship generally, that it should be based on clear text from the Quran and Sunnah, and likewise it should be also understood correctly as the companions and the tabi'een and the atba' tabi'een understood it. Then he mentions غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِينَ, not the path of those whom Allah's anger is upon, and not the path of those who went astray. The path of those whom His anger is upon, are those people who have knowledge, but they do not act upon their knowledge. They have knowledge, but they do not follow the knowledge. So Allah's anger is upon them. وَلَا الضَّالِينَ, and not the path of those who went astray. Those who went astray are those who acted without knowledge. So those people, they did actions, they just did it, blind followed, they just did actions. They didn't know whether it was based on Quran or Sunnah, didn't know anything. They just blind followed their shaykh and they just acted. They didn't know whether the Prophet ﷺ actually did these actions, they just did it. And then Yawm al-Qiyamah, they realized that the person they was blind following, or the group that they were just blind following and following without any evidences, that they find at Yawm al-Qiyamah that they weren't guided because they didn't have knowledge. So we have two groups here. We have a group whom Allah's His anger is upon because they had knowledge and they didn't follow the knowledge. Then we have another group who have gone astray because they acted without knowledge. So from this ayah, there's a middle path. What is the middle path for us as Muslims? What is the methodology? Just from this ayah, I want you to maybe think. If you've got a group that don't have knowledge and they act upon it, then you've got a group that have knowledge but they don't act upon it. So you got a group that they act without knowledge. Then you have a group that don't have knowledge, they have knowledge, but they don't follow it. What's the straight path? Yes, to seek knowledge and then act upon it. You see, look at the benefit. Allah here is encouraging the Muslim a methodology, not just to, because a lot of the times we hear people doing talks and they encourage to do righteous deeds, encourage to do these deeds, which is good. But they should be an encouragement to seek knowledge. Seek knowledge. It's obligatory for every single Muslim to have a certain level of knowledge. Don't think because you're not a scholar or because you're maybe not a student of knowledge that you can sit back and not seek knowledge. Every single Muslim needs to know how to pray correctly. Every single Muslim needs to know how to fast correctly. So when Ramadan comes, you should be reading. Read. We have many books in English, in Urdu, in different languages that we can read. Read, seek the knowledge. Ask the people of knowledge questions how to fast and what the rulings are. So that when you fast, you have the knowledge, you act upon it. See the methodology there? And then you worship Allah with the love, the fear and the hope. Based on the Quran and Sunnah, with the understanding of the companions. The whole of Surah Al Fatiha is a methodology for us to follow. So if we ever stuck or you're ever in a debate or anything, you go back to the surah. Wallahi, it's full of benefit. And what I've mentioned is only a few benefits. The surah is full of more treasures, which we, due to the shortness of time, we were unable to cover those extra gems that can be extracted. So the methodology, as we mentioned, is to seek knowledge. Everyone should be seeking knowledge. Know how to pray, know how to fast, know how to do Hajj. Before you do Hajj, read, research, seek the knowledge. Know how to be a father in the house. Know how to be a husband. Know how to be a mother. Know how to be a wife. All of you should be seeking knowledge. Knowledge which is obligatory for you to know. We all should know the difference between that is which is halal and haram. We all should know the major sins. We all should know these basics of Islam. But unfortunately today, one of the biggest problems that we have today is, which is why you're seeing all these problems in Iraq and in Syria and Palestine, across the world, you see that a lot of ignorance from the Muslims. Like we see in Iraq, we see in Muslims who are killing Christians, Christians who were living side by side, who were living in amongst the Muslims, protected by the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned, "Man qatala dhimmiyan," and in another riwayah, "Man qatala mu'ahadan, lam yarah ra'ihat al-jannah." Whoever kills a dhimmi is a non-Muslim, a disbeliever or a non-Muslim who lives amongst the Muslims, in the lands of the Muslims, and they are protected in the lands of the Muslims. Whoever kills a dhimmiyan, they will not smell the fragrance of paradise. And this is in Sahih al-Bukhari. And then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in another riwayah, mu'ahadan, which is, a mu'ahad is another type of non-Muslim. He is the one who does not live in the lands of the Muslims, but he lives far away in another land, but he's at peace. There's an alliance between them and the Muslims. They are not at war. So that country is not at war with that non-Muslim country. It's haram. It's haram to kill a mu'ahad. Then there are two other types. There is the musta'man. The musta'man is the one who does not live in the lands of the Muslims, but he comes to visit the lands of the Muslims, like an ambassador or a prime minister from another country, and he's under the protection of the Muslims in that country. It is haram likewise to fight these. And then the fourth type is the harbi. The harbi is the war type, and it is only permissible to fight the war type when they are killing and attacking your country, or if they're killing Muslims, which is logic. If somebody comes to your house to fight you, then you have all rights to defend yourself. This is logic. Or if there is a threat, somebody's on the way to attack you in your house, then you go out before the threat comes to your house. Okay? So Islamically, that is the principles of jihad. That jihad, it is haram to kill an innocent soul. And Islam is bari, it's free from terrorism, and it is free from killing of innocent people. So those Muslims who are doing this, they are not going back to Surah Al Fatiha. They are not following knowledge. They are not acting upon knowledge, because if they were, then they would be acting upon the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So based upon this, just a general reminder to try to ponder on the surah and try to act upon it, inshallah. Wabillahi tawfiq wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad.
Jazakallah khairan, Akh Abdurahmaan. I think he's just scratched the surface, as he's mentioned, and I'm sure there's books have been written just on the tafsir of Surah Fatiha. I'll take this point to open it up to you guys. If you guys got any questions, Akh Yunus.
Books would you advise the beginner in seeking knowledge, and how to go about studying them?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah ma ba'd. First of all, I would encourage those Muslims, as Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah mentioned, that it is obligatory for the Muslim to learn the Arabic language. But the scholars mention that this is for the one who seeks knowledge. So first of all, I encourage the seeking of knowledge. Those who do embark upon the journey of seeking knowledge, you should have the Arabic. You should be learning the Arabic. So first of all, you should start with, I would encourage learning the language of the Quran, Quranic Arabic. Then you obviously have the famous Medina books 1, 2, and 3. You have Al-Arabiya Bayna Yadayk. These are general books which people learn. But I would encourage those living in the lands of the non-Muslims to learn Quranic Arabic, to learn the Arabic of the Quran, because that's what's going to benefit you. If you learn, for example, conversational Arabic, which is good, however, if you do not intend to speak in Arabic, but you're just doing it to perhaps read and be able to understand the Quran and the Hadith in Arabic, then perhaps learning conversational Arabic would not be of great benefit to you, because you won't be able to practice and apply it outside the lessons. So I would encourage learning. Memorize the surahs, the small surahs, learn the language of the small surahs in Arabic, learn it in English, or try to understand the meanings of the words. Qul huwa Allah ahad. What does Allah mean? What does ahad mean? Allahu samad, as-samad. What does as-samad mean? At least when you recite the Quran in your salah, you can actually ponder and understand what you are reciting, and that way you can attain that level of khushu'. Because how many of us here really, when we are reciting the Quran in our salah, how many of us really know what we're saying? Really, ask yourself the question, do you know what you're saying in salah? How many of us really have cried after reciting in your salah, after in Dhuhr, Fajr or Isha? How many of us really have, after reciting just Al Fatiha? Wallahi, I heard an Imam, he was reciting Surah Al Fatiha and he was crying in Surah Al Fatiha from pondering on Fatiha. And as we know, the Prophet ﷺ, when he used to recite the ayat of the Quran, he would recite slowly. He wouldn't recite fast, not too slow, but not too fast. And he would ponder on the ayat. So how many of us really have the ability to really ponder on the Quran and understand the language, understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really is trying to, what He's really saying to us? So I would encourage first the learning of the Arabic language. If you are learning the Arabic language, or you already are at a good level, then the scholars generally advise books such as Al-Usul al-Thalatha, the 3 principles. If you, obviously it's translated in English, so you can refer back to the English for the time being. Likewise, Kitab al-Tawheed, the book of Tawheed, and also Al-Qawa'id al-Arba'a, the 4 principles, Kashf al-Shubahat, removing the doubts. Likewise, Al-Aqidat al-Wasitiyya, these the middle path belief, or the balanced sort of belief. Also books like Al-Aqidah al-Tahawiyya, and there are many books, but to start off with the few books like Usul al-Thalatha, Kitab al-Tawheed, Al-Aqidat al-Wasitiyya, these are good books to start with. In terms of hadith, Imam al-Nawawi's Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, his compilation of 40 hadith. This is a good book because each hadith is a principle. So if you memorize one hadith from that book, you've actually memorized a principle of the religion. So it's something that you can use on a daily basis. You can use it and utilize it in your life. So I would encourage the memorization of the 40 hadith, and also maybe perhaps to study that book with a person of knowledge, and also to memorize the Quran, to read tafsir, perhaps tafsir al-Sa'di, no, I wouldn't say tafsir ibn Kathir, but tafsir al-Sa'di is a good book. I believe it's been translated as well. There are many books, but first of all, I would encourage to learn the Arabic language. and also to learn the basics of fiqh, to learn the basics of salah, the basics of salah, hajj, and fasting. Allahumma sayyiban nafi'ah. So I would encourage that, inshallah. And there's so much to say, but we keep it short, inshallah. Barakallahu feek.
What's your advice on fitting that into a schedule where someone works 5 days a week, 6 days a week? How does he go about it?
MashaAllah, that's a good question. In a country such as this, where you're working perhaps from 7, 8 o'clock till 5, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, it's very difficult to fit in a schedule. But you can do it, but with difficulty, but you can do it. So this is how you can do it. When you pray your Fajr, I know of situations where people have actually, on the way to the masjid, praying Fajr, or every salah they pray, when they pray in the masjid, they read on the way to the masjid, or they listen to Quran, or they read books on the way to the masjid. When they try to get to the salat early, and usually there's about 15-minute gap between the adhan and the beginning of the salah. So what you can do is, in that time, you can read. You can study in that time. Then, once you've prayed, if there's a talk, try to attend the lectures after the salah. I would encourage, perhaps in this country, for there to be a lot more short talks. Rather than an hour, have maybe perhaps after every salah, or maybe in some prayers, after some prayers, have 5 or 10-minute reminders where a hadith is mentioned, because sometimes it is difficult for people to make it and stand after they've finished work, and then they have to sit for a whole hour. So maybe if the talks were more frequent but shorter, this is one way of dealing with it. Or likewise, if you're traveling, for example, if you're a truck driver, what you could do is you could play a CD, listen to Quran, listen to talks while you're driving. Even while you're going to work, play a talk. On the way back from work, play a talk. And what I would suggest is, once you've finished the talk, play the talk again. Play it about 20 times until you've memorized the talk. And you memorize the proofs. Because when you look at the Salaf, when you look at the pious predecessors and the ulama before, you used to hear narrations like, and I mentioned this, I memorized this hadith and I repeated it 50 times. Some of them would say, I repeated the hadith 100 times. Some of them would say, I repeated it 70 times. So how they used to memorize and how they used to seek knowledge is through repetition. And repetition is it's a key element for mastery and to sort of solidify the knowledge. If you listen to many talks, you probably only get a little benefit. But if you listen to one talk many times, memorize the talk, then it will stay with you for a long time. Once you finish with that CD, then you go into the next talk. Repeat it many times for a whole month. Listen to the same talk. Then you will see, without even trying, without even opening the book, you start quoting hadith. Because the hadith will be in your head because you've repeated it without you even trying. Then, onto the next CD. So, for example, this is what you could do. If there's a series of, for example, Kitab al-Tawheed, maybe there's 10 CDs. What I would say is, begin with CD 1. Then you repeat it every day. Play it in the house. Just play it in the background. Play it when you're driving, on the way to, if you've got it on MP3, on the way to the masjid, on the way back from the masjid, when you're waiting for salah, listen to the talk over and over again. Once you're familiar with CD 1, then go into CD 2, then CD 3. But I advise you that you must make sure that the CD has been explained by a person of sunnah, a person of aqeedah, sound aqeedah, and which is very difficult to find these days. It's very difficult to find a person of sound aqeedah. So it's important to find a person of sound aqeedah, and then on top of that, make sure that you sort of try to master and repeat what you are learning. And for the sisters, when they're in the house. Obviously it's difficult for the wives. Also when they're busy, the husbands are out working. Usually the sisters usually are in the house. So if they're busy in the house, one way, I remember a scholar mentioning this, they can use Paltalk. So you have Paltalk. YouTube, mashallah, tabarakallah, is full of knowledge. It's full of knowledge. So long as you can trust yourself to utilize the internet in a proper manner, then I would advise with YouTube and Paltalk. If you don't trust yourself with the internet, then I would suggest that you at home as a wife or as a mother, what you can do is play CDs. Even while you're cooking, let the CD play in the background. Just leave it to play. And then when it's finished, repeat it. Sometimes you can get bored of it, but mark my word, you'll see the effects after about a month. You'll start to quote hadith and you start to quote ayat. Then you go on to the next seed, and Allahu A'lam, inshallah.
I think one of the most difficult things nowadays, some people, like, for example, getting to the masjid for every side is difficult. You're at work and everything else. You become isolated. Not attending lectures, you're separated from brothers. What would you advise regarding that in those situations? Keeping close to brothers, keeping active, trying to keep active?
It's a good question, mashallah. The brother is asking about basically how to keep the bond of brotherhood together and to try to establish praying in the masjid, 5 prayers, and keeping that sort of link with the masjid and with the brothers, which again, it's one of those affairs which not everybody, we have to be realistic. This is not an Islamic country. In an ideal situation, in an Islamic country, when it's salat time, all the shops close and then you go to pray. So you can easily make every single salah. The first thing I would say is, obviously, if you're in a situation where you can make every single salah in the masjid, then you should. You should. If you're in that situation, then you should. However, some of us have to work long distance. Perhaps some of us are truck drivers. Maybe, perhaps you're on the motorway and the only way you can pray is in the trailer. I know of brothers who do this. So some of us are not in situations that we can sort of help. We can't help the situation. So if you're in a situation which you cannot help, if you can't make it to the masjid all the time, and Allah knows what's in your heart, Allah knows your condition. So if you can't cheat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah knows the condition of your heart and Allah knows your situation. So if you know and you understand your situation that you cannot make every single salah, in this country, it's not a Muslim country, they don't call the adhan. Sometimes you can get occupied, you forget that it's even salah, there's no adhan. Sometimes you can become neglectful. Try not to be neglectful, try to remember, try to have an alarm system to remind you. But if you cannot make it for every salah, then at least try to make at least some salat. So if you can't make 5, then try to make 4. If you know you cannot make 4, try to make at least 3. But it's just doing that which is within your ability. And Allah, la yukallifullahu nafsan illa was'aha. And there's a principle in the deen that Allah does not burden a soul more than it can bear. So fattaqullaha mastata'tum. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, that you fear Allah to your best ability. So that which is within your ability, you do that which is within your ability based on those principles. With regards to the brotherhood and trying to keep your iman going, then obviously I do believe every community should have a masjid. Every community where they're trying to do da'wah and where they're trying to establish the sunnah, they need to have a masjid so that you can have an imam there. When you have an imam in the area and a person of knowledge, you can have frequent, regular lessons every day on a daily basis because you have somebody fixed in that area. So I would encourage the brothers here and wherever they are to establish masajid. And don't think because you've established one masjid, you cannot establish another masjid perhaps a mile away or 2 miles away. Establish as many masajid as possible, but make sure that you have a good imam who has knowledge. That way, in every area, you have a fixed person who is who has knowledge, and the people can go back to that person, and then the person can, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, he can clarify the affairs of the religion. Also trying to busy yourself with that which is beneficial. A lot of us today, we try to get involved in affairs which not really, maybe perhaps are above our heads. We debate in issues that perhaps we don't really understand, or sometimes we talk about issues that's not really beneficial. So avoiding, when you're together, don't waste hours just talking about the dunya, for brothers talking about cars, or sisters talking about, I don't know, what the sisters talk about. I don't want to say nail polish. Perhaps, I don't know, women like shopping, they like shopping. So perhaps talking about shopping and fashion, I don't know, maybe, I don't want to get fired for this. So. Okay, so whatever you're talking about, try not to waste time. And try not to become extreme and extravagant in talking about affairs that are not beneficial. So when you're together, make sure it's not a problem if you joke and you mix it with, some relaxation, but try to make sure that there is some benefit and that you leave having raised your iman, and that you try to have regular gatherings. A lot of us sometimes, what happens is, as a community, this is what I've realized in Birmingham, that there's a lot of different groups. There's many, fractions of people. And what we need to do, we need to come together as a community. We need to do more things as a community together in larger groups. Maybe have more meals. And this is what we need to do. We need to establish activities and communities. And that way, if we do this, maybe on a monthly basis, you establish a monthly sort of brotherhood, sisterhood session where you all get together. You have quizzes, you enjoy yourselves, the kids enjoy themselves. That way you can establish a community, you can establish brotherhood. But if you don't do these things, then you will have these 5 brothers, they establish their own sort of group, and then these 5 brothers establish their own, and then everybody's backbiting and talking about each other. Whereas if you all gather together and you try to make it a communal thing, then I think that's more beneficial. So long as the gatherings are not wasting time talking about each other, especially if you generally have the same aqidah and you generally have the same methodology. However, that brother has erred in this issue or that issue. So long as the brother is upon sound aqidah generally, or the person is generally a person of sunnah, we should not be wasting our time, especially in a country like this where you're surrounded by innovation, you're surrounded by sins. You should be having a bit more intellect, a bit more logic. We need to get together more as Ahlul Sunnah, and we need to perhaps solve the differences amongst us. I think the differing amongst us is actually having an adverse effect. It's counterproductive. It's causing more splits, and it's destroying, I believe, the brotherhood. So I think we need to find a strategy, a way where we can avoid differing, and we can sort of establish a way where we can come together based on the Quran and Sunnah. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and to hold onto the rope of Allah together and do not differ. So Allah here, this is our methodology. This is the way to establish brotherhood and to increase your iman, that we come together based on the Quran and Sunnah. So if a brother has erred, you should correct the brother based on the Quran and Sunnah, based on evidences, and you should want khair for your brother by going to him, advise him based on the Quran and Sunnah. And we should not get into the habit of blind following and quoting people. Even if we're quoting ulama, we should not just blindly quote ulama. Because when the scholars differ, and this is a point I want to make, there is a difference between differing which is permissible and differing which is impermissible. Please pay attention to this point. Differing which is not permissible is differing which is based on the foundations of the religion, such as Tawheed. Things that are clear in the religion. We do not differ with regards to the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not differ with regards to Allah's names and attributes. We do not differ with regards to the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. We do not differ with regards to the tahreem of sihr, that everyone knows that the sihr is generally haram. And we do not differ with regards to these general foundations that Ahlul Sunnah are generally gathered upon. We don't differ in these affairs. If a brother has erred in any of these foundations, then an-nasiha. The Prophet ﷺ, he used to advise the Sahaba to give nasiha. We shouldn't be afraid of advice. You should advise your brother. If he has erred, then you advise him, you correct him. But the correction should be based on the fact that he has opposed Allah and His Messenger, and not that he has opposed your group, or not that he has opposed your sheikh, or not that he has opposed you. He has opposed Allah and His Messenger. If that has really been established, it is then you say the brother's erred. Not if you have an opinion and he's gone against your opinion or your sheikh's opinion. What has to be established? That he has erred. He has opposed Allah and His Messenger, and that he has gone against the methodology of Ahlul Sunnah. That can only be established if the person has established that. And the way of the Salaf is that they used to write. They used to write and they used to correct. But we don't do this anymore. We gather in groups and we have these secret groups and we backbite. And this is cowardice. Wallahi, this is not rujula. If you're a rajul, if you're a man, you will go to your brother and you will say, Akhi, Afwan, you said this and you erred. But why is it we have this cowardice about this? So this is one way we can establish the brotherhood. The other type of differing is the differing which is permissible, such as the branches of the religion, like in fiqh issues. Areas where the scholars, Ahlul Sunnah, have differed, such as raising your hands after the ruku', putting your hands on your chest after ruku'. Also differing with regards to recitation of Surah Al Fatiha behind the Imam in a loud prayer. These kind of issues are issues where it is permissible. Likewise, where scholars have differed with regards to a ruling on a person. So the scholars haven't differed with regards to the mistake. Yes, the person has made a mistake. All of the scholars have agreed that the person has made a mistake. But the scholars have differed with regards to the ruling of that person. Is that person an innovator? Is that person a disbeliever? Is that person this or is that person that? So long as the scholars have differed and it is permissible for them to differ with regards to the ruling of that person or the ruling on that group, then it is not for anyone to love and hate and argue over these things. If the person is following this sheikh, he says, I follow this alim because he's upon this opinion and he's based it upon these evidences. You should not, and this is not permissible for us to do this. Well, my sheikh said this, so you have to take my saying based upon what my sheikh said. Your sheikh's wrong. This is what's causing the splitting and this is what's destroying the brotherhood. So we have to learn how to differ. We have to follow the principles of differing and we need to learn how to differ. If we learn how to differ and respect the person for having an opinion, if it is permissible for him to have that opinion. Remember, ask yourself the question, is it yajuz? Is it permissible for him to have that opinion? If it's permissible for him to have that opinion based on the differing of the ulama, we only know if the ulama have differed in an area which is permissible to differ. If we know this for a fact, then we should not love and hate and we should not have arguments. This is one thing that's destroying brother. If we learn this, brothers, this methodology, remember I said that غَيْرْ مَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِينَ, that Allah's anger is upon those people who have the knowledge. They know these principles, but they choose not to follow the principles and the methodology of Ahlul Sunnah. Then Allah's anger is upon these type of people. These type of people. And you will not find barakah. How do you expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put blessing in a community that have knowledge? They know the principles, but they choose not to follow these principles. And they choose not to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He has established in the Quran and Sunnah. We finish there. Wallahu a'lam wa billahi tawfiq wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam wa subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.